August 4, 1943. At Bovington Camp in Dorset, England, the morning fog was heavy as Major General A.C. Richardson's pen moved across a document marked Most Secret. Each observation he recorded was about to expose one of Britain's most humiliating wartime failures. The reliability test begins today, he wrote. 3 nations' machines would travel 2,000 miles across Britain, and only one would prove truly worthy of modern warfare. Through the mist, 11 tanks stood on the parade ground, their engines idling with varying degrees of confidence. This mechanical symphony was deeply revealing. 3 American M4A2 Shermans powered by General Motors' twin diesel engines purred with industrial smoothness. 3 M4A4 Shermans using the Chrysler multi-bank petrol engine rumbled with consistent reliability. In stark contrast, 3 British Cromwell Mark I cruiser tanks equipped with the new Rolls-Royce Meteor engine growled with impressive power but a worrying roughness. 2 Cromwell Mark III variants added their voices alongside 3 Centaur Mark I tanks, which coughed and sputtered ominously due to their old, proven inadequate Liberty engines. The crews boarding these vehicles were unaware they were starting what historians would call World War II's most definitive reliability comparison. This exercise was not just a test of machinery, but a revelation about fundamental industrial philosophies. The Americans had prioritized consistent reliability and mass production, accepting merely adequate performance if it meant the tank would always work. The British, however, had chased theoretical superiority and speed, valuing impressive specifications over mundane dependability. Over the next 7 weeks, this operation, codenamed Exercise Dracula, would definitively prove which approach actually wins wars. The resulting numbers would be devastating for British national pride. The need for this test originated not in the English quiet, but in the North African deserts, where British tank crews faced a crisis of confidence. Throughout 1942 and 1943, British cruiser tanks had acquired a reputation for failing at the worst possible times. The Crusader tank, despite a theoretically useful 26-mile-per-hour top speed, spent far more time broken down beside the desert tracks than fighting the enemy. Its Liberty engine was plagued by oil leaks. Cooling systems designed for temperate England failed catastrophically in the 130-degree Fahrenheit African heat. Transmissions shattered on sandy terrain, and suspensions broke on rough ground. Crews learned to expect time-consuming breakdowns that left them vulnerable and frustrated. This frustration grew as American-supplied M4 Shermans arrived through the Lend-Lease program. While Shermans were technically slower, with a maximum speed of about 25 miles per hour compared to the Cromwell's eventual 40, they offered something far more vital. They started reliably every morning, which British crews could never take for granted. They ran all day without breaking down, required less maintenance, and were simply there when needed for combat. General Bernard Montgomery himself, the commander of British forces, privately noted that American tanks could be trusted to work, while British designs were temperamental and dangerously unreliable. The War Office in London faced a severe blow to British industrial pride. Years of dedicated engineering had produced a string of combat failures. The Covenanter, introduced in 1941, was so unreliable it never saw combat deployment, its cooling system failing regularly despite over 1,700 units being manufactured. The Crusader was only marginally better, and the Cavalier, which was an early Cromwell Mark I variant, was quickly relegated to training because it inherited the same flawed Liberty engine. Britain urgently needed a cruiser tank that could consistently perform under combat conditions. The supposed solution came from Rolls-Royce, a company synonymous with quality. Engineer W.A. Robotham ingeniously converted the mighty Merlin aircraft engine, the heart of the Spitfire, into a tank engine called the Meteor. This 600-horsepower V12 power plant promised the missing combination of power and reliability. Since the Merlin was supremely reliable in aircraft running for hundreds of hours between major servicing, engineers reasoned that this reliability would carry over to tank use. Installed in the A-27M hull, this created the Tank Cruiser Mark VIII Cromwell. Early tests were stunning. The Cromwell exceeded 40 miles per hour on test tracks, making it the fastest British tank of the war. Production began in January 1943, with multiple facilities tooling up for mass production of what everyone hoped was Britain's answer to German armored superiority. Hundreds of Cromwells were rolling off the assembly lines by the summer of 1943, and the War Office planned to equip entire armored divisions, finally ending the dependency on American vehicles. The new homegrown tank combined impressive speed, adequate 75mm firepower, reasonable armor, and hopefully the reliability that had eluded all previous designs. But doubts persisted among those working directly with the tanks. Early field reports from training units were distressingly familiar. Oil leaks around the engine created fire hazards and left tracks visible to enemy reconnaissance. Brake failures on downhill slopes left drivers unable to control the tank's impressive speed. Clutch problems immobilized tanks during training, and steering was often unreliable. These issues appeared during training with ample parts and skilled mechanics. What would happen in prolonged combat, far from supply depots? This urgency led to the decision in July 1943 to conduct a comprehensive reliability test. Exercise Dracula was designed as a 2,000-mile endurance trial across the length of Britain, pitting the new Cromwells directly against the proven American Shermans. The test would simulate campaign conditions as closely as possible, covering varied terrain in all weather, including rain and mud. Importantly, vehicles would be maintained under strict field conditions, using only standard procedures and tools available to frontline units, with no help from specialized factory experts. The result would decide the Cromwell's fate. The evaluation involved three main types of vehicles. The Sherman M4A2 and M4A4 variants, both proven in combat, represented the successful American design philosophy of simple, robust reliability. The Cromwell Mark I and Mark III represented Britain's best with the powerful Meteor engine. The last, the Centaur Mark I, with the outdated Liberty engine, served as a baseline comparison for older British technology. The exercise began in earnest on August 15, 1943. The 11 tanks left Bovington Camp, heading north on a route that would cover 2,000 miles over the next 4 weeks. Within hours, the first problems appeared. A Centaur began trailing smoke before covering 10 miles. By the first evening, the Centaur had a significant oil leak requiring 2 hours of emergency maintenance. A Cromwell experienced worrying brake fade on a long descent, forcing the driver to rely on low gears. The Shermans, in contrast, reached the first halt without any incidents beyond routine maintenance. By the end of the first week, unmistakable patterns had formed. The Centaurs consistently arrived hours late, their crews exhausted from intensive emergency repairs into the night. Oil leaks and overheating plagued the Centaur's Liberty engines, and slipping clutches made gear changes nearly impossible. One Centaur needed 8 hours of maintenance in a single evening, with the crew working under flashlight just to keep it running. The Cromwells performed better than the failing Centaurs, but still disappointed. Oil leaks around engine seals required constant attention. The brake systems were dangerously inadequate for a tank capable of 40 miles per hour. Clutch failures became increasingly common, a fault mechanics traced to a design unable to handle the Meteor engine's significant torque. Steering problems also persisted. Most concerningly, the observers explicitly noted that these defects were not new, but well-known issues that had appeared in earlier testing and should have been corrected before mass production began. The Sherman tanks operated with remarkable mechanical consistency that impressed even skeptical British crews. They started reliably every morning, maintained march speeds without drama, and only required predictable, routine maintenance. The diesel-powered M4A2 was particularly robust, described by one crew as nearly unbreakable. The American philosophy of simple, robust designs prioritizing dependable operation over impressive theoretical performance was proving its undeniable superiority. Captain Priestley, serving as second-in-command, documented the human cost of this unreliability. The fastest Cromwells should have arrived first, but routinely arrived late due to breakdowns and time-consuming repairs. This meant late meals, guides waiting for hours, fuel trucks held up, and loss of sleep for numerous personnel beyond just the tank crews. The ripple effect of one unreliable machine crippled the entire unit's efficiency and morale.
By early September, as the 2,000-mile exercise neared its end, the compiled maintenance statistics were devastating. The numbers compiled in the most secret final report exposed a vast gulf between American and British tank reliability. The three Sherman M4A2 tanks covered a combined 13,986 miles. They experienced a total of 199 defects, an average of 66 per tank. Specialist fitters required 420 hours of attention across all three tanks, averaging 140 hours per tank. This translated to just 0.03 hours of maintenance for every mile driven, or roughly 2 minutes of maintenance per mile traveled. This reliability was extraordinary. The 5 Cromwell tanks, however, covered only 11,582 miles combined. They suffered 367 defects total, significantly more problems over a shorter distance. Specialist fitters worked 814 hours to keep the Cromwells operational, nearly double the requirement of the Shermans. This meant 0.07 hours of maintenance per mile, more than double the Sherman requirement. Every mile driven in a Cromwell meant 4 minutes of maintenance, compared to 2 minutes for a Sherman. In campaign conditions, this difference meant Sherman-equipped units could advance farther and faster. The Centaur tanks performed the worst, covering only 8,492 miles due to constant breakdowns. They racked up 297 defects and required 742 hours of maintenance. This equated to 0.087 hours of maintenance per mile, nearly 3 times the Sherman requirement, confirming the Centaur was a failed design that wasted scarce industrial resources. Major General Richardson's final report was unsparing in its assessment of British failures. The simplicity and reliability of the American machines, in contrast with the British production, is to me the chief lesson of Dracula, he wrote unambiguously. He stated that a commander with Shermans could be genuinely confident of taking 99% of his vehicles into battle. A commander equipped with Cromwells or Centaurs would be in a continuous state of anxiety about whether enough tanks would actually reach the battlefield. The observers noted that Exercise Dracula was run under conditions very favorable to the machines, with adequate facilities and maintenance carried out in daylight. They concluded that the poor performance was sustained only through much hard work by dedicated crews and mechanics. Such favorable conditions would never be encountered in actual combat, where the Cromwell's already poor performance would certainly degrade even further. The causes of the Cromwell's unreliability were clearly understood. The Meteor engine, though powerful, was fundamentally an aircraft engine adapted for tank use. Aircraft engines operate at relatively constant speeds, unlike tank engines which must endure constant speed and torque changes during maneuvers. Oil seals designed for aircraft leaked under different pressure conditions. The cooling system struggled in the tank's confined space. The transmission and running gear problems stemmed from inadequate development time. The sophisticated but complex Merritt-Brown gearbox had more potential points of failure than simpler American designs. The brakes were dangerously inadequate for a tank capable of 40 miles per hour. Clutch failures became increasingly common, a fault mechanics traced to a design unable to handle the Meteor engine's significant torque. Steering problems also persisted. Most concerningly, the observers explicitly noted that these defects were not new, but well-known issues that had appeared in earlier testing and should have been corrected before mass production began. The truth of Exercise Dracula was deeply humbling for a nation that prided itself on exceptional engineering. British innovation had produced radar and the jet engine. Yet American industry, with its emphasis on reliability and efficient mass production over traditional craftsmanship, built fundamentally better tanks. The Shermans succeeded through American-style industrial efficiency and practical philosophy. Exercise Dracula proved that getting there reliably matters more than getting there impressively fast. The Sherman got there consistently. The Cromwell too often did not. That difference was the margin between victory and defeat.